Welcome to our class, PJS 3217, Conflict Resolution and Management for Governance. My name is Mr. Waswa, and today we look at lesson 2, which is teachers toward theory and peace building. So we shall divide the lesson into 3 sections, and the first section will be teachers toward theory. We shall refer to St. Augustine, and then the second section we look at the meanings of peace, and then we shall reference Johann Galtung, and then the third section we look at the theories of change for peace building, and we reference the 2 scholars Cheane and Mark Rogers. So we begin by quickly looking at teachers toward theory and trying to explain what it's all about, and then later on we get into trying to understand the 6 substantive principles of the theory. So the Western just toward tradition developed out of a rejection of the pacifist views that had dominated the early Christian church. It was an attempt by theologians, especially St. Augustine, to come to terms with the reality that given the existential condition of sin, violence would always be an endemic feature of human society. Violence was acknowledged to be evil, but so was inaction in the face of great injustice. So this theory mostly applies when there is great injustice that can be stopped using force. So it's an ethical dilemma whether we should use war or whether we should use diplomacy. And when diplomacy fails, then the just toward theory kicks in, where then we justify the war. So consequently, the tradition is built on the assumption that as a last resort, the use of force might be the only means to avert an even greater evil. So it's a last resort, and it's intended to do good as opposed to harm. Then we quickly look at the 6 substantive principles of the just war theory. And the first one is the just cause. That a war is only justified depending on the cause for which you go to that war. So the cause has to be just. It has to be a fair cause. So it needs to be a good reason, a reason good enough. So such a reason could be for self-defense, but most likely it's just to help prevent human rights abuse on a large scale in a particular country. So the just cause principle actually underlines the whole idea that there needs to be a supreme humanitarian emergency to warrant you to go to war, for that war to be considered a just war. And principle number 2 is that the war has to be a last resort, which means that you have to try all the diplomatic means, and when they fail, it's only then that you can choose to go to war as a last resort when all the other means have been exhausted. And then the third principle is good over harm, in that after you fight that war, the end result needs to lead to more good as opposed to harm. And just to use an example, when NATO and the Allies intervened in Libya in 2011, and they wanted to help protect people in that country, but at the end of the day, they ended up hosting and even killing Gaddafi. But the resulting end in that country is that Libya is a worse country today than it was before that intervention. So in a way, that war is not justified on those grounds because it did not lead to more good. But when you look at the war, like when Mwalimu Nyerere intervened in Uganda in 1978-79, you realize that Idi Amin Dada was ousted, and after that, Uganda became a better country than it was during the dictatorial regime of Idi Amin Dada. So that war achieved more good than harm. Proportionality has to do with the good that can be secured during war as compared to the amount of force that you use. So it's about comparing the good that you achieve and the collateral damage and the intended consequences that you cause. So basically, it means that you try to minimize on the force and maximize on the good that you achieve, so that you attain a certain proportionality of what you are achieving and how much force or how much collateral damage you are causing. And then the right intention principle goes into explaining the whole idea that sometimes countries go to war with a different reason, and when they get to that war, maybe they have said they want to help defend themselves or protect human rights, and when they are in there, they start pursuing other goals, which are away. So they had a different motive. They made a decision to go to war in the name of maybe self-defense, but once they get into that country, they start engaging in other things that are not related to their main mission. So that's why there's this principle of making sure that the intention remains clean and right up to the end. And then there's the whole idea of a reasonable prospect. When you go to war, you need to go to war knowing that you will win the war, because it's highly likely that you can go to war and you get defeated, and as you get defeated, it leads even to more damage than when you had not actually gone to war. So a declaration of war can only be just if the state can foresee probability of success in resolving the conflict through war. So violence without likely gain cannot be justified. So it's not a matter of just trying. War is not trying. When you declare a war, you need to be sure that maybe 75% you believe that you're going to win that war. And then briefly, we look at the definitions of peace, because we have looked at war as a means that can actually help lead to peace. So doing war can actually lead to peace. But now we just want to look at what is peace, so that then we can try to connect conflict and peace. We are moving away from conflict to peace, but what is peace? According to Johan Galtung, peace is the absence of physical and structural violence. And the emphasis is on the structural, because sometimes we try to think that so long as there is no physical violence, then we are at peace. But he insists that the structural violence also has to be addressed. And then that peace is not merely the absence of war, but the presence of justice, of law, and of order. And this is Albert Einstein, which means he's also backing up what Johan has said, that the absence of war alone is not enough. We also need justice, law, and order. And then there's this lady here, Jane Addams, an American lady, who was actually the first woman to be awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace in 1931. And she says, true peace is not merely the absence of war, it is the presence of justice. So that it's one thing to get rid of the physical war, but then it's another thing to focus on justice, human rights, democracy, rule of law, and the rest. Yeah. And then we quickly now look at the three meanings of peace, according to Johan Galtung. And the first meaning is what he calls stability and equilibrium. This is more or less like inner peace. It's more or less like tranquility and serenity, such that. But it's also the kind of peace that can be maintained by mere law and order, the kind of peace that the government can force on people to feel that they are at peace, when in the absence of the police, they are not actually safe. So it implies inner peace, but it also implies law and order. Then he discusses the second meaning of peace, which he calls the absence of organized collective violence, like what was in Kenya in 07-08 during the post-election violence. That was organized collective violence. So in the absence of that, you can say that the country is at peace. But you could also have negative peace, but you still have what we call sporadic violence, a little bit of violence here and there, but still people are enjoying peace. But once the violence becomes collective and organized, which means in the entire society people are fighting, then we need to get rid of that for us to experience what he's calling a negative peace. But within negative peace, we still have structural and systemic and cultural violence. So Johan is trying to move towards positive peace. He believes that that is where human beings belong. They need not to have collective organized violence, but that is not enough, that they also need to enjoy positive peace. And therefore, positive peace is minus organized collective violence, but it's also minus structural, systemic, and cultural violence. So that people are not fighting, but the structures and the systems and the culture is also okay. It's not discriminative. Resources are being distributed equitably. There is the rule of law, and there is also the spirit of human rights. And then he discusses positive peace and discusses 10 aspects of positive peace. And this is his ultimate peace, according to him. This is the absolute peace that he believes we need to move towards. This is the ideal peace. So there needs to be a presence of cooperation. In a country like Kenya, for instance, we need to see different communities working on similar projects for the common good, as opposed to some communities working on their own thing and competing with other communities, so that there's no cooperation. Politicians do not cooperate, institutions do not cooperate, so there needs to be cooperation for you to say that there's positive peace in a particular society. The freedom of fear, which means in a community where there's positive peace, there needs to be security, so that people are not walking around looking over their shoulders as if someone is going to attack them. So there needs to be security. And then he discusses freedom of want. People need to have access to the basic needs: food, water, housing, education, health care. So there needs the provision of those needs to the majority. That defines a community where there is positive peace. Economic growth and development. The country needs to grow, a community needs to grow economically and also to develop equitably as a characteristic of positive peace. Absence of exploitation, which means there's value for labor. When people work in that country, they get paid enough for what they have worked for, as opposed to being paid peanuts for the work that they do. And then the equality. It means that human beings within that society in dignity are equal, and therefore they need to be treated equally. And then there needs to be justice. And here they're discussing criminal justice. When people commit crimes in the society, they need to be held criminally accountable for those crimes that they commit. So this is about the rule of law. And then there's the freedom of action. This actually implies liberty in such a way that then people are able to do their things, to own property, freedom of speech, to be able to write, to be able to move, to be able to do what, to marry when they want and whomever they want to marry, to be able to worship in the religion that they want. So there needs to be this freedom of action, as opposed to traditionally when the government controlled everything. And then there is pluralism, and pluralism is about promoting diversity. In a society where there are different religions, all those religions are promoted. Where there are different political ideologies, all those ideologies are promoted, so that we are not just conforming to one particular thing, but that there can be pluralism, different languages, different religions, different political ideologies, etc. And then that there is dynamism, as opposed to a country or a community being static, that there is growth. When you come to a city like, say, Nairobi today, and then when you come 10 years later, there needs to have been some changes: infrastructure, institutions, service delivery. So things need to change, as opposed to things remaining just the same way they were 10 years ago. As the society changes, we move into the era of information technology, that the society also needs to adjust to that, as opposed to remaining on one end for a long period of time. Like Africa not becoming industrialized for as many years as the last maybe 70 years. Everybody's waiting for Africa to become industrial. We cannot become industrial, yet we have resources. Countries like China can come and take the resources, while here, even we can import toothpicks. It means that there's some place we have stagnated, so we are not dynamic. And then quickly now, I look at the theories of change for peace building according to Jeanne and Mark Rogers. We have simply discussed what peace is, but now we look at when you are trying to build peace in a society, coming up with peace programs, what should you focus on? Yeah? What are some of the deliverables after you have done that program? And one of them is the individual change theory, which means for you to be able to do peace, you have to begin by changing individuals, their consciousness, their attitudes, and their behaviors, and building in them skills that will allow them to be able to relate with the others. So you have to change at least a critical mass of individuals so that they can be able to align their beliefs with peace. So you can do that through investment in individual change, through training, personal transformation, conscious raising workshops, dialogues, etc. And the second theory is the health relationships and connections theory, where you try to build connections. You reconcile people and you build connections between individuals and between groups and between different tribes, most probably, like the BBI thing in Kenya, which is intended to build the bridges. So peace emerges out of a process of breaking down isolation, polarization, division, prejudice, and stereotypes. And we could do that through intergroup dialogue, networking, relationship building, and processes, joint efforts, and practical programs that address substantive problems that are affected by many people. And then the withdrawal of resources of war. Basically, that theory goes to explain that war actually takes resources, human resources, and even economic resources and material resources. So that then for us to be able to reduce war, then we have to cut the supply of those resources. Groups like Al-Shabaab, for instance, if we only stopped them from recruiting young people to join, we have already cut on their human resources. So the group is likely to die a natural death. So we could do that by engaging into anti-war campaigns to cut off funds and national budgets, consensus objection where people can refuse to go to war, and then international arms control and so many other methods that are listed there. And then the reduction of violence theory, that for us to end war, we have to begin by reducing the violence. Because there are some people who think that you can do justice before you end the war, that the war cannot end unless justice is done. But this theory is believed in ensuring that we can broker some ceasefire, come up with a peace agreement, and then we can work on justice later. So that then the intention is to help reduce violence first before we start working on peace. Because when the war is continuing, you cannot do peace building. You have to end the war first. So methods could include ceasefires, creation of zones of peace, withdrawal, retreat from direct engagement, etc. And then the root causes stroke justice theory, which focuses on the whole idea that where there is a war, there are always certain root causes that have to be addressed. So most of the time we focus on the consequences, which are short term, and then we address that and then we think the war has gone. But actually, the war is still there. So this theory goes to tell us that we need to focus on the root causes of our war. When you take an example of a country like Kenya, for instance, every time we have campaigns and elections, we end up with a war. And people think that the war is because of the politics. But when you analyze it properly, you see that there are some other root causes down there. Tribal hatred and land issues that have to be addressed, and systems that have been unfair. So the methods could be long-term campaigns for social and structural change, truth and reconciliation, could be some of the root causes that we could address to help prevent war from happening again. Institutional development and theory, more or less like institutional reforms. Institutions have to be changed. in a country like Kenya, since the 07-08, we have had so many things changed, including the different institutions, the police, even a new constitution, and so many other things have been changed in the country. So this goes to make sure that we change institutions, and when we change institutions, they help us prevent conflict from happening again. And the political elites theory simply explains that we can only end the war if we make the elites in a country feel the effects of the war. Because there is a likelihood that the elites in a country can make the others go to war, and as the low class people are fighting and the people in the grassroots are fighting, the elites are just enjoying their lives. So this theory goes to explain that we need to make the elites also feel the harm, feel the pain, and feel the heat of the war, and that once they feel it, they are also able to help us attain peace. So that then it's them now who start championing for peace as opposed to us. And then the grassroots mobilization is more or less like the opposite of the elites theory, because now this one means that peace does not begin from the top, but that people from down here, like what happened in India during the times of Mahatma Gandhi, and even in the US during the times of Martin Luther King, the people organize and they demand for what they want, and then that eventually, the government is able to deliver that for the people, so that peace begins from the bottom up, as opposed from peace beginning from the top down. And then the economics theory, it goes to explain how the economics within a country can be organized. Economic policies can be organized in a manner that supports conflicts and war, so that you come up with policies, including even budgets, that gives a lot of money towards war, and people are not aware that those policies are actually promoting war. In countries where the military is getting a lot of budget, and then in countries where weapons of war are the main business that is being done, even the toys that children are being bought for, their toys of weapons, then it means that in such a countries we need to control the economics, so the money can be focused on growing the people and building connections, as opposed to empowering people militarily so that they can be able to fight each other, so that we can kill the economy that promotes war. And then the public attitudes theory is about the whole idea that the war is about the attitudes of the people. So we need to change the attitudes of the people as a group, so they can learn to be tolerant, so they cannot be prejudiced, and they cannot have misperceptions about each other. So we could use television and radio to change the public attitudes and build greater tolerance in society. So methods could be TV and radio programs that promote tolerance, modeling tolerant behavior, symbolic acts of solidarity and unity, like the handshakes that we've been having in Kenya recently, dialogues among groups in conflict, or just different groups meeting and discussing issues and being able to solve those issues. So that explains the different theories of peace building, what we need to do to be able to build peace, which is a process. It's a long term, as it has been explained in the definitions, that it takes a long period of time. And just in conclusion, just some other perspectives of how one would do peace building, which is more or less like what I have already talked about, but just from a different point of view, like social economic development and the different aspects of doing that, good governance and the different aspects of doing that, reform of justice and security institutions and the different aspects of doing that, culture of justice, truth and reconciliation, and the different aspects of how you can be able to do that. So basically, the lesson is just about the different meanings of peace, and then at least understanding a little bit about the just war theory, and then towards the end, I'm just focusing on what we need to do for us to be able to promote and build peace, long-lasting peace that is locally sustainable within the society. And that actually brings us to the end of our lesson. Thank you.
These televised lectures supplement our robust online learning going on our MKU online platform. You can view more on our televised lectures via our online platform. We are in a digital era, and Mount Kenya University knows this. The following are the steps to follow so as to complete your online application. Download the application form from the website www.mku.ac.ke. Attach copies of your academic certificates and ID. Pay the application fees via M-Pesa pay bill number 270988. Your ID is the account number. 2,000 shillings is the charge for a postgraduate. You can also deposit in the bank accounts provided on the website. Then email all the above to apply@mku.ac.ke.